mini lecture today. So we will be focusing on architectural and um, real estate photography. Okay, so since architectural photography is very broad, we will just simply be sticking with the essentials, with the basic principles in architectural photography, which will help you guys take better shots. Okay, so let me present my slides. Alright, so just a brief background of myself. Architect Ian already made a little introduction about myself. So I've been in this field, photography, for 10 years now. I purchased my first DSLR way back 2010, and then several months thereafter, I decided to take my photography a bit further, and so I decided to attend a basic photography workshop. And then afterwards, I also attended an advanced in Manila, and then took specialized courses as well in product photography, in lighting, in wedding, and then at the same time in fashion photography. Okay, so as to my academic background, I graduated from a computer school. I graduated with a computer degree, and then I pursued law as well. Okay, so as what Ian said, you can become a photographer while harboring another course or degree or field. So you can be an architect photographer, an engineer photographer, as well as any degree actually. Okay, so let's have a few definition of terms. Let's define first what architectural photography is. Okay, so architectural photography is simply photographing the design aesthetics of buildings and structures. So in architectural photography, we are focusing on the design of the building. Okay, we are showcasing the artistic intent of the architect. Okay, now this is sometimes confused with real estate photography. So real estate photography, on the other hand, is a different field, although it involves the same subject matter like buildings and houses, but they have a different purpose. So in real estate photography, the intent here is to take pictures to sell the property, okay, for public listing. Unlike with architectural photography, it focuses more on the building. We are trying to show to the whole world how talented the architect is. Okay, so it says here in the definition, it isn't just about showcasing the facade of a building and its external features. It also covers the whole building in its design entirety. It's really more of the design than the building itself. So we are focusing on the aesthetics and not on the strength of the materials of the building. Okay, so in real estate photography, on the other hand, so it says here, it's all about showcasing real estate for the purpose of selling property. So it is of primary importance that we capture all the spaces in a home. Okay, because we're trying to sell the property. And then another topic which is related to architectural photography is landscape photography. So in landscape, we are focusing here on the beauty of nature. Okay, on works of God, basically. So landscape photography is the art of capturing pictures of nature and the outdoors in a way that brings the viewer into the scene. So it says here, landscape photographs typically capture the presence of nature, but can also focus on man-made features or disturbances of landscape. So here's an example of a landscape photo. Here's also another one. So we can see here, these are natural beauties. Okay. As to the second definition, it says here, it can also include those landscapes which have man-made features. So for example, in this case, this is a volcano and there is a house here. So although there is a man-made structure, this is still landscape photography because the artistic intent of the photographer is to showcase the beauty of nature and not the house. Okay. However, if we zoom in and focus on the house, then that already belongs to the realm of architectural photography. So we need to look at the artistic intent. So if the artistic intent is to showcase the beauty of the building or the design, then it's architectural. If it's beauty of nature, then it's gonna be landscape. Okay, same thing with the second picture. There are boats here. um, man-made structures, man-made creations, but the artistic intent of the photographer here is to showcase the beauty of this lake, okay, and of the mountains. Same thing here. So if you take a look at the Mayon volcano, for example, now there is the bell tower here. This is a very famous picture. This is considered landscape because the artistic intent of the photographer is to showcase the Mayon volcano and not this bell tower here. So if he focuses or zooms in to this bell tower alone, even though we can see the Mayon volcano at the background, that will be architectural. So once again, this is landscape because we are showing the beauty of the volcano, of a beauty of nature. Okay, now to begin our discussion with the principles of architectural photography, let me show to you a picture of mine. I took this several years ago. So this is the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So I just would like to ask for your input. So I need some audience participation here. I would like to ask for your input regarding this picture. So what do you think is wrong with this picture? Actually, to an amateur eye, this is okay. In fact, some see this as very beautiful, very majestic, very nice. But in architectural photography, in commercial standards, this is not considered acceptable. So I just would like to see if you guys have any background or knowledge or prior knowledge regarding architectural photography. Okay, so can anyone try to answer? Hello? Any attempts? Anyways, you will not be graded, guys, so don't worry. Pwede naman mag-Bisaya sad. Just would like to get your input, or what you can say about this photo. Okay, somebody says here angle. So what else? Any other try? Pwede rin niyo i-type if you're a bit shy. Symmetry. Okay, another try. Okay, so wala na. Okay, so actually the important architectural photography principle that is involved in this case is the vertical alignments principle. So what I'm talking about is that in every architectural photo, you should always consider the verticals. Okay, they must be aligned. Okay, they must be parallel with each other. So in this case, in this photograph, if you can see, if you look closely, the building is a bit skewed, so it's a bit distorted, diba? So here, principle number 1, you should always remember this: verticals must be aligned, and you have to avoid distortion. So what separates an amateur architectural photographer from a professional is this. So this is the number 1. It must be aligned. Okay, so the photograph, okay, the architectural photograph must provide or must be an accurate representation of the building. Okay, this is architectural photography, by the way, is more of commercial photography. So we have to be as much as possible, be compliant with certain principles. Okay. So to explain, so why do edges of a vertical photograph get distorted? So this actually happens when the sensor of your lens is not parallel to the plane of the object you're shooting. So in this case, in this picture, when I took this, I was of course at the bottom of the building. So tendency is when I took the picture, trying my best to capture everything, so I was like leaning backwards, to get a perfect shot. But the result is it ended up being a bit distorted or a bit skewed. So to remedy this, actually the best thing that anyone can do is to purchase appropriate equipment, and the appropriate equipment that I'm talking about is what we call as a tilt shift lens. So this is a very technical, a very specialized lens. In fact, this is very expensive, and in the future, as future architects, if you want to know, okay, if that photographer that you're hiring is a professional, like, dead serious professional, is you have to look if he has a tilt shift lens. Okay, if he doesn't have one, then he is just an amateur. Because if you're dead serious to become an architectural or real estate photographer, you should have this lens. This is like the go-to lens of architectural photographers, especially in the US or abroad. They always use this lens. Okay, so let me show you a photograph of a same scene, the Petronas Towers. This is taken by another photographer, but he used a tilt shift lens. We have the same vantage point, by the way. So here it is. So I was actually here in this part of the surroundings. So I was at this part, but he was able to take a better picture, a better perspective of the building. If you can see, his representation of the Petronas Towers is more straight, more aligned than what I had. Okay, although he just edited the picture to black and white, but I'm talking here about the structure of the building. So it's more aligned compared to mine. Okay, this is because he used a tilt shift lens. Now let me show you, or let me define first what a tilt shift lens is. So a tilt shift lens is a lens in which the optics can be tilted and or shifted in relation to the image sensor. So tilt shift lenses also rotate to allow the lens to tilt and or shift in a wide range of directions. So with this kind of lens, it allows the photographer to change the position of the imaging circle. So you just have to tilt the lens to change the center of that imaging circle, which can straighten the lines that appear to converge in the distance. So this is very technical. So the best thing that I can do is I'll be showing you a video, okay, on the mechanism of this lens, because it's very hard to visualize just by simply reading the definition of this lens. So by the way, this is the price. So you need to have, you have to have the budget for this. So 90,000 for Canon if you're using a Canon. If you have a Nikon or a Nikon, you have to invest 100,000. There's a third-party lens. This is made in China. It's 45,000, but still very expensive. Okay, so that is actually the best way to correct distortion while on shoot. So let me show you this is a YouTube video.
First thing you'll notice about this one is it looks different. It's got this big chunky section right up the front. This Samyang is 35mm, it's full frame format. It's 3.5 to 22 in aperture. Now whilst this has a bulbous front element, it's recessed. You can use traditional filters on this. And this one has 16 elements in 11 groups. 2 of them are spherical elements, and it also has 2 extra low dispersion elements. So certainly one of the most complicated lenses made by Samyang, and given the incredible things these kind of lenses can do, you want all of that optical technology in there. So why they call these tilt shift lenses is because on one axis it'll tilt and on the other axis it shifts. Again, looking at this Samyang, it's a 24mm and it's an f3.5 aperture. 3.5 may not sound too fast, but what you can do with the depth of field on this lens is truly remarkable. First of all, looking on the right hand side, there's your lock for the shift. Now, unlocking that, then on the other side, we can adjust that dial and you see it's literally shifting the lens up and down. This one gives you plus and minus 12mm of shift. And I'll explain what that does later, but just for now, keep in mind shift goes up and down. So you're shifting the lens up or down from staying parallel to the sensor, okay? And then if you look on the bottom of the lens, there's your lock for the tilt. Unlocking that, then looking on the top, we can tilt left and right, and this one gives us 8.5 degrees of tilt. Now, what that's doing, it's taking our lenses from being parallel to the sensor to being on an angle. And why it's able to do that and still have full frame coverage is tilt shift lenses throw a much bigger circle of light over your sensor than a traditional lens. Traditional lens may just cover the sensor. This one throws heaps more so that even when you're moving up and down, left or right, you still have enough coverage that you're never going to get grayed out areas on the sensor where it's not getting information. Now, let me explain what each of those functions do to you before we demonstrate it. So, when we're shifting, which means keeping it parallel but going up or down like that, essentially, if that's the one you use to fix converging lines. If you've ever shot up at a building and then you see the buildings look like they're falling in on each other, that's why. It's because your perspective is too low. So if we're aiming straight on, but then we tilt the lens up, it gives us the effect of being higher when we're shooting. So suddenly our converging lines go back to normal. And the same works if you're at the top of a building shooting down. You could shift it down and it gives you the effect of having been lower in the frame when you did the shot, and you can fix up all of those verticals. Really, really cool. So this is the classic. Here with the 24mm with no shift applied, you can see as we lean up to get the building in, it looks like it's falling over because of our low vantage point. Here, as I apply shift, shifting the lens up, then you can see the building stays really square, and they're actually taking...
Okay, so that should explain the mechanism of this lens. Okay, now if you don't have the lens, of course, if you don't have the budget, if you are poor, like me, to correct this, of course, the best thing that we can do is to use graphic design software like Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Lightroom. Okay, so let me show you a little demonstration. This is actually what happened when I did a lens correction using Adobe Lightroom. So this was my original photo, and then I corrected the photograph using Adobe Lightroom, and then it resulted into something like this. So it's not perfect, but it's a much better representation of the Petronas Towers. So here's what I did, okay, to show you guys. It's just very easy actually, if you have Adobe Lightroom installed in your computer. So this is the lens, this is the picture. Now you go to this portion here of the develop module here in Adobe Lightroom, and then you go straight directly to lens correction. Okay, this portion here, and then there's because we're trying to correct the verticalness of the image, so we toggle our shifts, our buttons to this portion here. So we edit this, we click now the button. So as what you can see, the image is starting to correct itself. So here, here, here. So it's more vertical now. It's parallel, and then we make further adjustments until we can perfect the image. And you just have to crop this up. So this is what I did. Okay, so it resulted into something like this. I just made further adjustments to improve the image. Okay, so that's what you can do, guys, if you don't have the budget yet for the tilt shift lens. Okay, now another question, by the way, for our next topic. So what do you think is the post-processing technique that I applied in this image? This post-processing technique, by the way, is also commonly used by professional real estate and architectural photographers. So can anyone make a guess, or does anyone know? So I just would like to get your input once again. Anyone wants to answer? Any try, guys? Okay, since nobody's answering, so I'll just go straight directly. Now, this is actually what we call as HDR photography. Okay, so what I mean is that this HDR photography will actually give your images a more 3D-like look. So it accentuates the details of the image. So what you can see here, it shows more details, it has more shadows and more highlights. So giving your image a much better look. Okay, so here are other examples, by the way. So this is also another image that I took in Singapore. So as what you can see, it has a lot of details in it. So to do this, actually, you have to take 3 images of a particular scene. So we call that an overexposed, an underexposed, and a properly exposed image. Now, what I mean about overexposed, it's too bright. Okay, and what I mean by underexposed, it's gonna be too dark, and the properly exposed is the correct exposure, or the average exposure of the picture. So what you do is you blend those 3 images, same scene, and then you combine them in an HDR software. In my case, I use a Photomatrix software. So you blend those images, and then you make further adjustments to the image depending on the kind of look that you want to achieve. Okay. So here are other examples, by the way. So this is another image. This is not mine. This is taken somewhere in the US. So there are more details actually in the image. So another one. This is somewhere in London, I guess. So if you can see, it's more 3D-like. and this is commonly used among architectural or real estate photographers. Okay, here's also another one. This is the interior of a church somewhere in Italy. So it's able to highlight or accentuate the lighting, the wonderful lighting of the church or the basilica. Okay, so let us define by the way, what is HDR photography? Okay, so HDR photography, or high dynamic range, is a technique that involves capturing multiple images of the same scene using different exposure values and then combining those images into a single image that represents the full range of tonal values within the scene you photograph. So as what I mentioned a while ago, you take 3 images or 4 of a particular scene, and then you combine them into one. Actually, to do this, if you have a DSLR, there is what we call as an auto exposure bracket, so which allows you to just do one click, and then the camera itself will automatically take 3 or 4 images from a particular scene. So one image will be overexposed, properly exposed, and underexposed. And what the camera will do, and what you can do in post-processing, you just have to simply combine everything. Okay, so here are also other examples of HDR photography. So these are my pictures, by the way. So this is these pictures are in Singapore, and this one is in Malaysia. This is just right across the Petronas Towers. So these were all done in HDR photography. I guess there's also a mobile app for HDR. I wasn't able to research that yet, but I'm pretty sure there's an app which allow you to combine images using your mobile phone. So you can also make use of this post-processing technique even with the use of your phone. Okay. So here it is. So my next question is, this is also another photography technique. Can anyone try to answer what this type of photographic technique, what photography technique did I use in achieving this kind of look, this blurry light effect at the bottom?
Shutter speed.
Okay, another try.
Shutter speed.
Another try. Well, actually, you are correct on the shutter speed part, because we did make use of the shutter speed to achieve this look. But the much better definition of this motion-like, of this blur-like effect is it's actually called a motion blur. Okay. Now, to achieve a motion blur, you have to make adjustments to your shutter speed by by increasing the value. So by making it slow. Okay, so here are the steps, by the way, to capture motion blur. So you have to decrease your shutter speed. So by the way, when we talk about shutter speed in photography, we're simply talking about the time the shutter of the camera will close or open. So the slower, okay, we do, or the slower the shutter speed, the more light will come in. But the tendency is, if we adjust our cameras to a slower shutter speed, it's gonna be more blurry. So if you want to take sharp images like in sports, if you want to freeze an action, then we have to increase our shutter speed. And then another one is you use a smaller aperture. Okay, so when we're talking about smaller aperture, we're talking here about the lens, the opening of the lens. And then you use the shutter priority mode. You reduce your ISO setting. Now, by the way, ISO setting is more on the sensitivity of the camera sensor. So this is very technical. I will explain this a bit later on. And then you use a filter to create motion blur, and then you stabilize your image using a tripod. So tripod is also very important, okay, to avoid camera shake. Okay, so here are other examples of motion blur. So you can actually use this technique in your architectural shots to evoke a sense of activity or a sense of motion, in your scene. Okay, so to better explain the technical terms that I mentioned a while ago, so let's go to the next topic, okay, which are these 3 things. Okay, let's focus on these 3 things. In every basic photography workshop that you will be attending, or if you do plan to attend, these 3 elements are actually discussed thoroughly. Because if you want to get away from the auto mode of your cameras, you have to master these things. Because these are creative controls, which will allow you to be more creative with your shots so that you can control the look of your image. Because if you're stuck on auto mode, sometimes the camera can take good pictures, or even nice pictures, but as what I said, you don't have the control of the image. So let's just say you want a silhouette effect, the auto mode cannot do that, because what the auto mode does is it gets the sort of the average settings of your cameras. He just wants you to produce a so-so image, an average representation of the image that you're trying to capture. So if you want to be more creative with your shots, so you have to master these three. Okay, these are actually called the exposure triangle. Okay, so let's start first with aperture. Now, as what I mentioned a while ago, aperture can be defined as the opening in a lens through which light passes to enter the camera. So it is expressed in f numbers like 1.4, f2, f2.8, and so on to express the size of the lens opening. So which can be controlled through the lens or the camera. So let me illustrate this. So this is an illustration. So these are the, this is I believe a 1.4 lens. So this represents the opening of the aperture. So if you have a low aperture, so that means there is a bigger opening of the lens. Okay, so f2.0, so it gets smaller and smaller, and then it gets very small. Okay, so if you do this, let's just say if you take a photograph with an f1.4 aperture, this will actually result in bokeh, or what you call as something like this. Okay, so it has a blurry background, and the camera is focusing on this lady here. Okay, so when we talk about a small aperture, that means a slow depth of field. It's also another a related topic in aperture. Okay, so when we talk about depth of field, it is simply the distance between the nearest and furthest furthest elements in a scene that appear to be acceptably sharp in an image. So it simply talks about the sharpness all throughout the image. So as a low aperture will result in images with blurry scenes. So it will just simply be focusing on one area of the image. But if you want a sharp image all throughout, then you need to increase your aperture, diba, in here. So you can do an f8.0 or f16. So it will achieve, it will result to something like this. It's sharp all throughout. If you go with an f1.4 or f1.8, a low aperture, it will result to something like this. Okay, so that should give you a better understanding of aperture. So you have to remember, the lower the aperture, the lower the depth of field, and depth of field simply means the level of sharpness in your image. So if you want a lot of sharpness, you have to increase your aperture, something like this. If you want to focus on one subject and blur the background, for example, then you need to have a low aperture for that. Okay, you just have to remember that. Now another topic or another element or principle in photography that you should also master is shutter speed. So this is related to the motion blur topic that I discussed a while ago. So it's the length of time the camera shutter is open, so exposing light onto the camera sensor. So essentially it's how long your camera spends taking a photo. So here's an illustration of shutter speed. So the higher the shutter speed, the sharper the image. So you're able to freeze action. Diba? This is used in sports or in journalism. And if you want a blurry-like effect, you can have a slow shutter speed. Okay. So here's another example as well to better illustrate. So slow shutter speed will result in more blur. The faster the shutter speed, it's going to be more, it's going to be sharper. Okay, and objects become more clearer. Okay, in slower shutter speeds, moving objects become blurry. Okay, now another topic is the ISO. So it is simply a camera setting that will brighten or darken a photo. So as you increase your ISO number, your photos will grow progressively brighter. So ISO, by the way, is more on the sensitivity of the camera sensor to light. So how much it can absorb light. Okay. So here's an example of, let me illustrate to you the mechanism of ISO. By the way, if you increase your ISO, the tendency is it will make your photos more grainy. Okay, now although it may grow your images progressively brighter, but the tendency is it may degrade the quality of your images. So if you use a basic DSLR, if you increase your ISO to high numbers, the tendency is the pictures will look grainy, so it will be of less quality. Unlike when you decrease your ISO number to like ISO 200, it can still retain its good quality. However, if you purchase advanced, highly advanced cameras, like, you know, cameras that would cost you like around 200,000 or 300,000, even if you increase the ISO, they can still take acceptable photos. So that's actually the difference between a basic, cheap, or inexpensive DSLR over a highly advanced camera. It can capture more beautiful photos, sharper and more quality photos, even in higher ISO settings. So this is sensitivity to light. ISO is also very important when you're taking night shots. So if you're taking night shots and if you want more light to come in to your camera, so you need to bump up your ISO. So that's why if you purchase less expensive cameras or the cheaper ones, it does struggle with nighttime photography. Okay, so that's why you have to buy the more expensive ones, the more advanced ones, if you want to become dead serious with architectural photography. Okay, so here, so if you can see here at this example, the left side is cleaner because we are set at ISO 100. Now when we set it to ISO 6400, now it becomes more grainy. Although it's not really that noticeable, but to a professional eye, this is not really that acceptable. I mean, if we are to submit this to a client, we have to have the best pictures possible. But of course, with Photoshop and Lightroom, this can be corrected. Especially if you don't have the budget for those highly advanced cameras. So of course, we can always find ways. So here, another illustration of ISO. So we compare the noise, the level of noise, or the graininess of an image. So in ISO 100, we have a clearer, cleaner, neater image, and then as we progress, as we bump up the ISO, then here. I believe this is taken by a basic DSLR. So in ISO 6400, it's already very grainy. So more noise is appearing in the picture. Okay, so all those three would actually result to a proper exposure. So exposure is the amount of light per unit area reaching a frame of photographic film or the surface of an electronic image sensor, as determined by shutter speed, lens aperture, and scene luminance. So the elements that I mentioned a while ago are all part of this important principle. So they're actually called the exposure triangle. So if we play with aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, then we will be able to get the right amount of exposure, or the kind of exposure that we want in our photos. Because there are some photographers who purposely intend their photos to be too bright, or they call that high key photography. So they intend to make the pictures look very, very bright. And there are some photographers as well who intend to make their images look dark. So it's more of low-key photography. So you do that by making adjustments with these three things. So you need to make adjustments with aperture, with shutter speed, and then with ISO. Okay. So what is a properly exposed image? So a properly exposed image photograph is one that is neither too light nor too dark, and a good exposure will include highlights and shadows, and a varying degree of contrast in between. Okay, so it doesn't matter if the photo is in color or black and white. If a photo is too dark, then it is called underexposed. Okay. So why is exposure very important? So exposure is very important because you're able to capture all the information of the scene. So with all the possible details in the highlights and the shadows. So let's just say, for example, if your image is too bright, tendency is you will not be able to capture a scene. Like for example, you're taking the interior of a house and there's a window and the window is too bright and it's just like white, for example, you know. So you will not be able to see what is outside, diba? So you have to be very careful in making adjustments to your photograph. Okay. So another important principle that we will be discussing today, by the way, is composition. Now, composition is very important in photography because it is simply how you frame your shots. Now, composition can be applied even if you're using your phone. Okay, if you have noticed in Instagram or in Facebook, you can see a lot of people who don't have any technical background in photography, but they are able to take good pictures. And that is because they have a natural eye for composition. Okay, they are not applying any principles, but subconsciously, they're actually applying it. They just don't know what the principle is. Diba? So we will be discussing that here. So we will be discussing different composition techniques, which will help you to attain balance and create interest in your photos. So it simply means here, composing an image means arranging elements within a way that suits the core idea or goal of your work best. So arranging elements can be done by actually moving the objects or subjects. So it's either you physically reposition yourself to take a better perspective, or you physically remove something in your photo to take a great shot. So that's just how composition is. Or you just have to simply change your angles. So here are the composition techniques, and I will be explaining them one by one. Okay? So the first composition technique that I'll be using is what we call as frame within the frame. So to illustrate this, before I read the definition, so here's what I'm trying to, this is a frame within the frame example. Okay? So to explain, a frame within the frame, including a frame within the frame, is another effective way of portraying depth in a scene. So you look for elements such as windows, arches, or overhanging branches to frame the scene with. So the frame does not necessarily have to surround the entire scene to be effective. So here, you look for arches or windows or any opening, and then you place the subject matter of your image inside that particular frame. So like here in the Taj Mahal, the photographer purposely placed the picture or this structure here inside this particular arch. Okay, so another example. So this is somewhere in the Middle East. The photographer placed it somewhere in this like stone-like window. Same thing here. This is, I believe, somewhere in Russia. So the photographer positioned himself somewhere here in an arch or something, so that we'll be able to take a photo of this building. Same here. This is a castle, and I believe this is a gate, an opening of a gate. And so he took the photo from there. Okay, so another example or another compositional technique that we will be discussing is leading lines. So leading lines helps lead the viewer through the image and focus attention on important elements. So anything from paths, walls, or patterns can be used as leading lines. So in this example here, we have the Eiffel Tower, the subject matter. Now the marble here, the marble pattern, will direct the viewer to the Eiffel Tower, to the building. Okay, so it will direct you. The reason why it's leading lines is because it's leading your eye to the subject matter of the scene. Okay, it helps you focus on the important elements in a scene. So here are other examples as well. This is a tree. So it is leading you, this road here is leading you to the main subject. Another example, this is a bridge somewhere in San Francisco. So this one here, this part here, the lines here will direct you to the bridge. Another example as well is bridge is leading you somewhere here to see these humans here. And then this pattern here will direct you to the mosque. Okay, it's leading you to the mosque. Leading lines does not necessarily have to be straight lines. It can be spiral or crooked or circular. As long as it's leading you to somewhere, it is still called leading lines. So here the spiral staircase is leading you to somewhere, like down below. Okay. Now, another important principle in architectural, in composition in general, not just in architectural photography, is what we call as rule of thirds. Now, this topic is commonly discussed in basic photography workshops. We always hear this every time you attend photography workshops. So, what this simply means is you don't necessarily have to place your image in the center of the image, in the scene or in a particular scenario. So, to better illustrate this, so here, so we can see the tree is placed somewhere here, placed somewhere in this horizon or vertical line. So the rule of thirds is a type of composition in which an image is divided evenly into thirds. So 1, 2, 3, both horizontally and vertically, and the subject of the image is placed at the intersection of those dividing lines or along one of the lines itself. So another example, so here are other examples, by the way. We have here, and then this one. So we take a look at the anchor points, and you place the main subject in these anchor points. Okay, so this building, the photographer intentionally positioned himself somewhere here so that he can have this building as the main subject, and he didn't place it somewhere in the middle but somewhere here. So this is the rule of thirds principle. Okay, so another composition technique that we can apply is what we call a centered composition or symmetry. So this is the complete opposite of the rule of thirds. So what you do is just simply place your image at the center of the photograph. Okay, and you look for symmetrical patterns or symmetrical elements or figures that are both identical. Okay, so this bridge here, these two here are identical. So it results to a symmetrical type of composition. So symmetry is also known as formal balance, is achieved when both sides of the image hold equal weight. So each photograph is equally balanced if split down the middle, yet one is literally symmetrical and the other uses different elements of the composition to appear symmetrical. Okay, so here are other examples, by the way. So this is a bridge, identical, so they give a sense of symmetry. You can also use this principle in stairs if you're photographing like a mall or a big establishment. So you can use this type of composition in these cases. And then we can also make use of symmetry in reflections. So here is the Louvre Museum in France. So the reflection here acts as a symmetrical figure, or it's because it's very identical to the actual structure itself. So it gives a sense of balance and interest in your photo. Now another composition technique that you can also use is to be more observant and find patterns of diagonals and triangles. So if you look closely to these images, there are triangular forms. Okay, so these triangular forms, according to masters in photography, will create interest in your photo. So here, triangle, this, I don't know what this is. So the bridge here is triangular in form, and then this part here where the anchor is located, so it's triangular in form. So you just position yourself in such a way that a triangular form is created in your image. Same here in the stairs, so there are triangular forms here. The shadows are triangular, and also here, the statues, the perspective is a bit triangular in form. The statues, I mean, yeah. So here, okay. So another composition technique that we can apply is what we call as foreground interest and depth. So including some foreground interest in a scene is a great way of adding a sense of depth to the scene. So you have to include a foreground interest in the frame to give the scene a more 3D feel. So here's an example. So you position yourself at a specific vantage point, which will allow you to take photograph of something, and then have the, let's just say, a building at the background. So this is the foreground, and this is the image. So it gives a sense of depth to this particular scene. Okay, here's another example as well. So this is the foreground, part, and then the waterfalls is considered as the background. So it gives a certain level of depth to your photos. Okay, so another principle that we should take note, and which is a good compositional technique, very easy, just have to simplify. You know your focus. So having too much going on in your frame can mean that the person who's looking at it just keeps searching for a point of focus, and soon gets bored of looking when they can't find one. So if there are irrelevant elements in your frame, so you just have to remove them. Or if you want like just the picture of the head portion of a particular human subject, you just have to focus on the head part. If that is your main focus, you just have to simplify. And in architecture, so let's just say, for example, you're taking photograph of the Capitol building, and there are children playing around. So you ask those children to move temporarily out from that place, so that you can take a picture of the Capitol building, because the children are irrelevant in your frame. They do not add interest to your frame, unless of course if you're photographing like in journalism, if it's journalism photography, and if you're trying to evoke let's just say poverty and society or something like that, some drama, then that's very nice. But if we're talking about architectural photography, we need to remember we're trying to showcase the artistic intent of the architect. We're trying to showcase the beauty of the building. So those children there are unnecessary in your image. Okay? Or if you want to, let's just say they're pedestrians, and you want to show a scene that it is a community, then you can also include. So you just have to go back to the artistic intent of why you're photographing a particular scene, and just simply simplify. Just know your focus and when to focus or where to focus. Okay, so here an example. So this is very simple. I believe this is minimalism type of architecture. So the photographer here just simply take a photo of the front portion of this house, and then look at his background. It's very clean, no wires. So you also have to be mindful of the wires, or if there's a trash can here. So as much as possible, you remove all of them. Okay, because that will detract the viewer to the main beauty of the structure. So simplify, or be a minimalist. Another composition technique that you can apply in your photography is also what we call as patterns and textures. So you have to be more observant. You look closely at your environment and see if there are patterns and textures, because that can also add visual interest in your images. So as what experts say in photography, human beings are naturally attracted to patterns. So they are visually attractive and suggest harmony. So patterns can be man-made, like a series of arches, or natural, like the petals on a flower. So incorporating patterns into your photographs is also a good way to create a pleasing composition. So less regular textures can also be very pleasing on the eye. So here are examples. So this is a pattern. Okay, so they do add interest in this particular shot. The photographer is focusing his lens on these patterns and had this moss at the background. Same thing with here. This is also another example of patterns. Okay, the shadows here as well, and then these succeeding or just neighboring houses. It gives a certain pattern look. Okay, so another tip or another principle that we should take note in composition is to watch the background. So this is related to simplify. So as what I said a while ago, unsightly objects, overexposed or particularly bright areas, and blocks and dots of bright color will all pull the eye from what it's meant to be focusing on. So take a good look at your background before you take your shot, and if possible, find a background that's not so obtrusive. Okay, so here's an example of a photo. Now this is a very beautiful minimalist building, but there is this lamppost here, which is detracting or distracting the viewer to the main attraction, which is this beautiful small building. So the photographer here should have repositioned himself to take a better vantage point, or to have a better look of this minimalist building. He should have positioned himself somewhere here and just take a front view and zoom in a bit so that this portion here will not be seen. Okay, so that is the importance of composition. You know where to position yourself and how to angle your shots, because it does make a difference, a very big difference. Like this shot here, you know, this is unnecessary and irrelevant to your photo. So let's have another example. So if you look at these pictures, this is the same picture that I showed earlier. Now here, you know, the background is very simple. It's just white, diba? And then this part here. Shooting at a particular time is also very crucial. So most probably the photographer here took this photo like some like at late afternoon or something like that, so that the background will be like white, pitch white. Or maybe this is like snow season somewhere in the, you know, in the west. This is I believe late afternoon. So you have to select the day, the time of the day when to take your photograph, because that's also crucial. Because if this is a night time photograph, then of course this would be black. So choosing a particular time of the day is also very critical in the final result of your image. Okay, so another important compositional technique is what we call as rule of odds. So this simply means it suggests that an image is more visually appealing if there are odd numbers, or there are odd number of subjects. So the theory proposes that an even number of elements in a scene is distracting, as the viewer is not sure which one to focus his or her attention on. So an odd number of elements is seen as more natural and easier on the eye. So let's have an example here. So this is applying the rule of odds principle. So odd numbers 1 to 3. So the human subjects here, they're also in odd numbers, so 1 to 3. So they say, photography experts say that having odd numbers or odd numbers in your photographs can visually attract your viewers. Okay, so you can also apply the rule of odds when you're taking interior shots, interior design shots, and if you're capturing details in your interior. So here, so rule of odds, another rule of odds application. 3, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So another example of rule of odds, still 1, 2, 3 here as well, odd numbers, and this is 1, so just it's 1 is still an odd number. So they say it's visually striking. Okay, so another principle of composition is filling the frame. So it simply means filling the frame with your subject or the main interest in your photo, leaving little or no space around it. And they say it can be very effective in certain situations. So it helps focus the viewer completely on the main subject without any distraction. So it allows the viewer to explore the detail of the subject that wouldn't be possible if photographed from further away. So filling in the frame often involves just getting in so close that you may actually crop out elements of your subject. So in most cases, in many cases, this can lead to a very original and interesting composition. So let's take a look at examples. So filling the frame. So here in the right, we can see that the photographer filled the frame entirely. You know, leaving no room or space around. Unlike here, this is the Notre Dame Cathedral. So the photographer intentionally including little space. But this is still belonging to the category of filling the frame composition technique, because this is just having the photographer here left little room to his image. Okay, other examples of filling the frame. So we have here, so the photographers are entirely filling the frame, no room or no space around the images. Okay, they simply zoomed in to capture these images. Okay. So another important or another principle in composition is leave negative space. So this is the complete opposite of filling the frame, because in leaving a lot of empty or negative space around your object, they say, can also be very attractive. So it creates a sense of simplicity and minimalism. And like filling the frame, it also helps the viewer focus on the main subject without any distraction. So here is an example of leave negative space. So this is a statue here, and then it's just, it's very simple. In the sky, so it leaves a lot of negative space. And this is also applying the rule of thirds principle. So you can apply many principles in one particular scene. You can bind those elements together, to achieve a visually attractive image. Okay. So another tip or another principle that we should take note is just simply to change your point of view, move around, because you may never know that a better shot will be achieved if you just simply have to move around. So you can also take a top view of the image. So if you have a drone, or if you go to a, let's just say, a skyscraper and be at the top floor and get a perfect shot down below. So this is also another example. Or you can change, you just have to reposition yourself physically to get a better shot. Okay, or to discover more shots if you're trying to show everything, or if you have a collection of photos that you want to show to your client. Or let's just say if you take a photo of an interior, so it would be best sometimes if you take a photograph like in the four corners of the room. Okay, you take somewhere it's also a tip, by the way, for interior design photography. Be at the four corners of a room so that you can have all the angles taken, and then you can simply delete out the photographs that you don't really find very pleasing, as long as you're able to take or capture everything, all the spaces. Okay. So another composition technique is to look for particular color combinations. So color theory is something that graphic designers, fashion designers, and interior designers are all very familiar with. So certain color combinations complement each other well and can be visually very striking. Okay, so this is the color wheel. So if you take a look at the color wheel, they say you can see that the colors are arranged logically in the segments of a circle. So colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel are said to be complementary colors. So as photographers, we can look for scenes that incorporate complementary colors as a way of creating attractive and striking compositions. So let's have examples, okay, to better understand this topic. So in this example here, we have the building. So it's a bit yellowish, and then he is opposite to this body of water, which is color blue. So if we go back to the color wheel, color yellow and color blue or violet are opposite in the spectrum or in this particular wheel. Now let's have another example. We have the building here, lighted building. It's colored red, and it's surrounded by a blue sky. So if you go back to the color wheel, red and blue are opposite each other. So they say, according to experts in photography, they do add some interest or some level of contrast to your photo, which will make it more visually attractive. Okay. Now another important principle in composition or technique in composition that you can apply in your photos, even with the use of your camera phones, is the rule of space. Okay, so the rule of space relates to the direction the subjects in your photo are facing or moving towards. So if you're taking a photo of a moving car, for example, there should be more space left in the frame in front of the car than behind it. So this implies that there is a space in the frame for the car to move into. So let's take a look at an example. So in this case here, we have here a barge or a boat, and the photographer intentionally left a lot of space in this portion of the image to direct viewers that this particular boat here is going to this particular direction. So it simply directs the viewer that this boat here, or barge, is going to this particular place or direction. So it's what we call as rule of space. Now another important principle or technique that you can apply in your photos is balance. So you have to balance elements in the scene. To balance pictures, what you can do is you can do the symmetrical type of technique that I mentioned a while ago, or what you can do is to place elements of secondary importance. So let's just take a look at this example. This is a picture somewhere in Europe, or I believe this is somewhere in Venice, Italy. Now this is a lamppost, and this is a building or a church. The lamppost is the subject of main importance, and then the building here is the subject of secondary importance. So it gives a sense of balance in your picture. Okay. Now another example here as well, found in Europe. This is the Eiffel Tower still. So the lamppost here is the main subject, and then the tower is subject of secondary interest. Okay, or the secondary the secondary image or interest in your photo, secondary subject matter, okay, in your photo. Alright, so balance is a compositional technique in photography that juxtaposes images within a frame so that the objects are of equal visual weight. So when different parts of a photo command your attention equally, perfect balance is achieved. So placing a subject of secondary importance also balances the image. Okay, so another technique that you can apply as well in your photographs is what we call as the golden ratio or the Fibonacci spiral. Okay, I'm sure you guys here have encountered this word, I believe, in your architecture, in your visual design class. So Fibonacci spiral, so the spiral looks something like this. Okay, so you can place your main subject at this part here of the snail-like spiral. And they say this will create more interest in your photos. This is like a variation of the leading lines principle, but in another way. Okay, so this is a definition of golden ratio or the Fibonacci spiral. So two quantities are in the golden ratio if the ratio is the same as the ratio of their sum to the larger of the two quantities. So instead of a regular grid, the frame is divided into a series of squares, as in the example that I showed a while ago. So this is known as the free grid, and then you can use the squares to draw a spiral that looks like a snail shell. Now this is called a Fibonacci spiral. Now the squares helps to position elements in the scene, and the spiral gives us an idea of how the scene should flow. So it's like an invisible leading line. So it's like a curved version of the leading lines principle. Okay, so another example that we can show to better illustrate this principle. So the castle here, let's have this as the main subject, and then the bridge here is leading your eye to the castle. And according to experts, this kind of principle helps create visually attractive images. Actually, if you intentionally use this principle, this will blow your mind because it's hard to look at. But if you analyze closely, this is actually very simple, diba? Or sometimes when we take photographs, we are not really applying principles, but subconsciously we are. We just realize that we are applying principles later on when we look at our photos once we transfer it from our cameras, diba? Or once we preview everything, then that's when we realize that it's actually a Fibonacci spiral. And now since we already know this topic, then we're able to appreciate more or much better our images than before, even if it's just a Facebook post. Diba? At least you can wow your audience or your Facebook friends or your Instagram followers. Now another important principle in composition is getting horizons horizontal. So it's an elementary mistake that a lot of photographers make, because it can actually spoil your otherwise brilliant shots. So what simply means kung sa Binisaya pa, nahiwi siya. So you just have to straighten them up. So you level your image. So you make sure that your images are level. And another tip of making your images leveled is to use a tripod. So there in a tripod there is actually sort of a bubble-like diopter, and which will allow you to see if your image or your camera is in a stable position, or if it's in a horizontal plane. Because if it's not, if it's slanted, or if it's not in a equally level surface, then the bubble will signal you that your camera or your tripod is not on a equally level surface. So this also helps you get your horizons horizontal. This is the horizon, and it's horizontally perfect. Okay, so to better illustrate, so let's draw a line. So this is your horizon, and it's perfectly horizontal, diba? It's not slanted or skewed. Although there are times wherein we apply intentionally, we angle our shots in such a way that it's a bit slanted. But in most cases, if you're trying to photograph architectural photos, as much as possible, be conservative and just put or level your cameras in a straight position. Okay, in a horizontal plane. Okay, another example. So this is horizontally positioned. This photographer here is also applying the rule of thirds principle. So as what I said earlier, you can apply as many principles as you can in a particular photo. So I believe your professor here will be giving you an assignment applying these principles. So even with the use of your camera phone, you can apply composition techniques, even with the most basic camera phones. Diba, as mentioned earlier, there are a lot of like Instagrammers or friends in your Facebook who who do take very good pictures even with the use of their camera phones. They have a natural eye for composition. They don't know these techniques, but they are applying them subconsciously. It's just that they don't know what they're doing. Okay, so getting horizons horizontal, this is also another example. Alright, now let's proceed to another topic. Now, this is a photograph of mine. I took this somewhere in Indonesia. This is actually the Borobudur Temple, one of Indonesia's most famous attractions. And this is considered to be one of their landmarks. Now, my next question is similar to my question in the Petronas Tower. So, what do you think is wrong with this picture? So, can anyone try to answer? I just would like to gauge if you have any prior knowledge of photography. So, any guess there? Okay, somebody answered light. Okay, another try. You can type in your answer kung mawaw mo. Don't worry, this is not graded, so you can you can give your answers. So no other try. Okay, so I'll just proceed directly since mga shy kids man mo. Okay, now the abnormality in this photograph is actually this rainbow-like color cast here, or a color fringe, and this is actually what we call as a chromatic aberration. So this is a very technical term, and I would like to emphasize this because this can also destroy the beauty of your photo. So this happens when this especially happens when you are facing in front of the sun. So the light rays of the sun, they converge to the optics of your lens, resulting to some sort of abnormality or distortion, which produces something like this. This usually happens in the lower contrast or dark contrast portions of your image. So this is actually very minimal. In fact, it's not really that noticeable, but to some pictures, it does spoil your images. So take a look at this example. This is the worst form of chromatic aberration. So it resulted to a very blurry image. Diba? It is no longer pleasing to look at. It's no longer acceptable to an amateur and a professional eye. So you have to be careful as well. And the best thing that you can do is to actually reposition once again. Move around. Moving around is a very basic yet very important tip that you should always remember every time you're photographing a particular scene. Because that can spell the difference between having this kind of photo and having a perfectly sharp photo. Okay, now what is chromatic aberration? Now let me define that. Let me read this definition. Now, chromatic aberration, also known as color fringing or purple fringing, is a common optical problem that occurs when a lens is either unable to bring all wavelengths of color to the same focal plane, and or when wavelengths of color are focused at different positions in the focal plane. So once the light rays converges with the optics of your lens, or of the optical elements in your lens, it creates some sort of a distortion or abnormality, which can actually be fixed if you use a filter, or you just simply have to find another perspective or vantage point or angle where you can take a much better photograph without having this kind of abnormality. Okay, so let's proceed to more tips to perfect your architectural photography. Okay, so the number one tip is to actually shoot in a variety of weather conditions and times of day. So this was discussed earlier. So shooting a series of images during different times of the day or even in various weather conditions can help to paint a fuller story of the building's relationship with its environment. So you can, there's a difference between a night shot and an afternoon shot and a morning shot and a midday shot. Diba? In midday, mga udto, it's very bright, very light, because of the sun, exposure to the sun. During if you want to achieve like this kind of look, if you want to emphasize the lighting, you might as well take the photograph at night. Or let's just say if you are in the US with four seasons, diba? Let's just say you're photographing the White House. It would also be best if you take a photograph, like a winter photograph of the White House, like a summer photograph of the White House. So it paints a fuller scenario, or it gives you a fuller story of the building's relationship with with its environment, with climate and weather. Okay. Or if it's raining, if you want to have like a rain effect in your photo, so you can also take a photograph of the rainy season if you want to to achieve a fuller story in your photography collection. Okay. Now the second important tip that you should take note is to prioritize good lighting. Okay, so regardless of when you're shooting photographs, a good lighting should always be a priority. Okay, so great architectural lighting helps to emphasize space, specific structure, or atmosphere, and thus plays a big role in shaping one's understanding of what is important in that specific architectural project. So good lighting simply means that it's not too dark or too bright, diba? This is also related to good exposure. So the tendency is if your image, if there's a portion of your image that is too bright or too light, then you will not be able to capture all the details or the spaces. Okay, so what you can do, let's just say for example, you're taking a photograph of an interior of a house or building. Well, the best thing that you can do is just simply turn on the light, diba? Or if there's a window and it's like daytime or afternoon, then you just have to simply open the window or open a portion of the window to let light come in. That is actually called ambient light or natural light. Now, if you have an external flash, if you have the equipment, then you might as well use your equipment, okay, to have good lighting in your photographs. Okay, so let's take a look at an example here. Now, this is a photograph. This is actually using ambient light. So the photographer here did not use any external flashes. So he just let light enter the scene in this window here. So you just have to simply open the window, or use a let's just say a curtain, see-through curtain or white curtain, which will allow light to come in. Okay. Now another example. So this is also ambient light. Okay, using natural light. So the photographer here just simply took the photo. I think this is daytime photo. So as what I mentioned earlier, choosing the time of the day is also crucial to achieving your shot. So if this was taken at night, so the best thing the photographer can do at first is to, of course, turn on the light. And if he has external flashes, that also helps. Okay. Now another tip, and this is also related to the composition techniques that I mentioned a while ago, is to look for a unique angle. So you play with different perspectives, okay, because that can also be a very entertaining to do, and it is also very rewarding. So taking time to find a different angle from which to photograph can expose an overlooked form or abstraction of a building's detail that may give rise to another level of beauty and appreciation for its form. So who knows, if you just simply reposition yourself, you might be able to take a much better angle or much better perspective of the architectural work. So it's very important as well that you look for unique angles. Okay. So here, so if you take a look at this building here, now this also applies another principle in photography, which is symmetry and patterns and textures. Okay, centered composition, another perspective. And then this also, this church here, so the photographer was like at the bottom part, and then he leaned backwards to take a photo of this part of the building. Okay, and then the number 4 tip is don't be afraid to include people. So this is also what I discussed earlier. So if let's just say the pedestrians in a particular urban scape are relevant to your photo, so you might as well include them. Diba? But if they're not necessary, if they're not relevant to the story that you want to paint in your picture, then you might as well reposition yourself so that they cannot be seen. Diba? The same example that I mentioned a while ago, the Capitol building. So if there are children playing around, and your mission there is to, to showcase the beauty of the Capitol building and not to evoke or like present poverty and society and in our government, then you might as well, reposition yourself and just take the photograph of the Capitol building without those children playing around. Okay, so don't be afraid to include people when necessary. Okay, if it's not necessary, then just stick to your original mission, which is to photograph the building. Okay, so here, this is the building, and the photographer here is not afraid to take photos of these human subjects here. Okay, because it is relevant to his story. Okay, so we always have to go back to the artistic intent of the photographer. Alright, so explore details as much as the whole. So this is a very important tip that you can apply in your interiors. So aside from the entire scene, let's just say you're trying to photograph the entire living room, or the entire kitchen, or the entire dining room, or the master's bedroom. So you also take photographs, let's just say if it's a fully furnished house, you take photographs of the cabinets, the buildings, you close up to the, let's just say, the lights, so that in that way you'll have a good collection of photos. So although shooting with a wide angle lens is usually the smartest thing to do when it comes to architectural photography, buildings contains hundreds of intricate little details that are lost when an entire facade or room is shot in just one frame. So let's just say the moldings in the building, you can take a close-up view of that particular part of the structure. So exploring details up close could reveal something new about the building's history or construction, for example. So for example, when you're photographing a church, there are a lot of intricate details in the church. So you can close up, you can use a longer lens, a telephoto lens, which will allow you to zoom in and see up close the details of that particular part of the building. So here are examples. So this was taken in a house. So the photographer here took photographs of the cabinets, diba? And then tables, lights, the vases, something like that. So you just have to be more observant and scrutinize everything in your surroundings in a particular scene. Okay, to paint a fuller picture of the entire room. Okay, so here are also here's another example. So the photographer is taking a photograph up close to the stairs. Maybe he's trying to emphasize the stairs here, the stairs part of the house. So these are part of details. So details can add to your collection, can be added to your collection. Now another tip is try not to objectify the building. So although we do have our own signature shots, like we take one signature shot to, let's just say, paint or represent the building, but it would be much better actually to take several angles or perspectives. So this is also related to other principles. So let's read the definition here. So imagine the shock of visiting a building you've only seen a photograph from one good angle. So objectifying a building to a point where only one photo visualizes it from one point of view is one of the greatest disservices of architectural photography. So making an effort to record the complete spatial context of the building is not easy, but it's not impossible either. So as mentioned earlier, try different angles, explore more angles, and who knows, you might be able to discover better perspectives in one particular scene. So here's an example. So if you have a drone, that also helps because you're able to take the top view of the building. You can also photograph the building off axis. So this part here, and then front view, and then you can have the side view. So that your viewer or your potential client will have a good perspective, or have a much better idea of what to expect in your building when you're doing photography. Okay. So use post-processing tools. Actually, using Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom is not cheating. You can process your images, and experts and masters and professionals are using post-processing tools to improve the look of their images. So processing images these days has become quite a standard part of photography. So allowing you to tweak your images to perfectly match that atmosphere you want to capture. So let's just say, for example, let's go back to my example earlier. the Capitol building. So if you know how to edit, if you know how to crop, okay, like a certain scene, like let's just say, for instance, the children, you can tweak that in Photoshop and remove that part of the image. Or let's just say there's a trash can, you can simply just edit that in Photoshop, diba? You just have to crop or do a clone stamp tool. You make use of the clone stamp tool, which will allow you to just copy the surrounding surface, so that you can remove that particularly distracting or unnecessary element in your photo. So while images should only be altered with a clear understanding of what kind of changes are acceptable, so software such as Photoshop and Lightroom are easy to use with a wide variety of advanced functions such as lens correction. So if you're looking for an easy way to create a panoramic photography using a series of images, then you make use of this post-processing techniques. Okay, but of course you have to be realistic as well. So in editing your photos, make sure that it's a much, it's a realistic portrayal of the original photo, diba? So let's just say there's only one door, and you're editing in such a way there are 3 doors. So that's already a different case. That's already manipulation, and it's already cheating, diba? So you have to be when you're post-processing your images, you have to make sure that they are a more accurate representation of the original. So what you're just trying to do is just you're simply like highlighting the details and the shadows, or making or increasing the contrast and saturation to make your photos more realistic. And as what I said, a better portrayal of the original scene or of the photograph, or accentuating the beauty of the scene. Okay, so you make use of Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop. So a while ago I used Lightroom. Actually, Lightroom is a much better tool in photography if you are just simply making global changes. So let's just say, for example, you're trying to increase the contrast and the let's just say the overall feel of the image, the overall tone, or if you want to increase the brightness, so you can just use Lightroom. So it's just as a matter of just simply pulling the slides, diba, the buttons. Now, if you do manipulation, of course you have to use Photoshop for that, because this will now involve layers, and you will be like adding certain parts of the image to, or something like that. If you're like copying and pasting certain things, if you're doing photo manipulation, then you can use Adobe Photoshop. But for most photographic post-processing, Lightroom can actually do, okay, because it's just a simple matter of just dragging and pulling the levers in this part of the develop module. And of course, for faster results. Photoshop sometimes can take time. Unlike in Lightroom, the images are already well stacked. So you just simply select a photo. There's already a library. So let's just say, let me grab my Lightroom. So the images are already present here. So you just have to simply, click the image that you want, and it will just pop up. Okay, so for example, this one, I want to edit this. So you can just simply, just click and drag and, click, and then the image will come up. Unlike when you go to Photoshop, you have to, do it one by one. So you have to file, open, something like that. So Lightroom is a much speedier and more practical way of editing your photos. So for a faster turnaround. Okay, the next part is to invest in appropriate photography equipment. And when I talk about invest, I know shelling out some cash would be a little heartbreaking for some, especially since we're already in the pandemic. I mean, we are still in the pandemic phase of our times. Now, you have to invest in appropriate photography equipment if you have the money in the future, because the reason why I'm calling this investment is because it does offer you returns. Okay, so if you have the budget, you spend some money to purchase good quality equipment. So just a while ago, with the tilt shift lens, it allows you to capture a much better perspective of the building, rather than taking rather than taking that particular scene in a medium size lens or a zoom lens. So if you're serious about getting started with high quality architectural photography, of course, investing in the right equipment is going to reap big rewards. Although your cell phone can take very good pictures, of course, it's still another thing if you have the right equipment, or a DSLR or a drone, for instance. So that also gives your photos a sense of professionalism. So a wide-angle lens is most commonly used for photographing buildings and interior spaces. And of course, you also purchase a tripod, to stabilize your image. stabilize your images. So it can open up a lot of possibilities to shoot in low light conditions, among others. So you may also buy a filter so that to add contrast and make your images more vivid. So if you're looking for something on the next level, of course, as what I said, a drone with a quality camera installed could be an exciting way to go. Okay, so here there's a tripod. You can make use of different lenses. Lenses with different zooms and different focal lengths will allow you to take different perspectives. So this long lens can allow you to take close-up images of details. Wider lenses can allow you to take the entire scene of a structure or of a building. Let's just say the entire kitchen, diba? And then, of course, the tripod can help you stabilize your image, and other filters. So these are things which will help you in your photographic journey. That is if you're dead serious about becoming an architectural photographer. So, but if you're not really that interested, of course, your camera can do. So it really depends on your intent, on your purpose. But you can start with basic DSLRs. They can open up a lot of creative possibilities for you. You just have to practice and be more and be more persistent. Okay. All right. So here are more pictures. So this is the drone, and this was the tilt shift lens that I showed a while ago, which is the go-to lens for architectural photographers. So if you hire an architectural photographer in the future, once you become architects, licensed architects, you need to you ask the photographer if he has a tilt shift lens. If he doesn't have one, then he's not a serious architectural photographer, because this is the go-to lens for architecture photography. Or if he doesn't have this one, then what that means is he will just simply edit the photos in Adobe Photoshop or Lightroom. Okay. Now, another tip is to revisit the site multiple times. So, returning to the same place again and again will reveal new layers to the architecture that can be used to communicate the development or perhaps the degeneration of a building over time. So sometimes, let's just say you visit a particular scene or a particular site. If you visit it on another day, it does help, because who knows, you might be able to discover new spaces or new perspectives, which can of course help you communicate, or showcase the beauty of the building that you're photographing. So seeing a perfected photograph of a newly constructed building is of course beautiful and fascinating, but why not follow the architecture beyond that perfect first shot? So let's just say you were able to take wonderful photographs on a specific day, let's just say on a Monday, and who knows, if you go back there on a Wednesday, you might be able to discover new things or new perspectives or new spaces that will reveal more beauty on the architectural work. Okay. Now, another tip is to research the building beforehand. So you research who the architect is. So if it's a historical building, you read up on the history and context of the architectural site, before visiting. So it's also an indispensable resource that will of course help you focus your photography. So let's go back to the Capitol building again as an example. Then you try to research who the architect is or was. So the architect for the Capitol building was Juan Arellano. Diba? So he is one of the most famous architects in Philippine history. He was the one who constructed the Capitol building, the City Hall, the post office building in Manila, the Supreme Court. So many important architectural works in our country that are part of our history. The Cultural Center, the Art Deco theater building in Manila. So those were works done by Juan Arellano, who was sent to the United States to study architecture. Okay, so you research his other projects, and that will help you get a fuller sense of the history of the building, which will allow you to discover more. What is his art. So you can focus on the details, and you can try to relate that with his other works as well. Diba? And of course, my super last tip is to have attitude. You have to have the right mindset. Photography takes time to learn. It's not hard, like studying law or studying other subjects like engineering. But, you have to try until you succeed. You have to practice. So you persist, you make mistakes, be humble, okay, allow feedback, so be recipient or be receptive of feedback, If somebody criticizes you constructively, then just accept it. Okay, and of course you have to try until you succeed. Now, another important point that I would like to stress on humility is that when you're photographing an architectural work, you have to be, you have to remember this. Okay, what we're trying to showcase here, is the talent of the architect. Okay, so this is not about you. This is not just about you and your creativity. We are also, as a photographer, you are the representative of the creativity of the architect. Okay, so as much as possible, although there are times wherein we experiment with different angles, try to be as conservative as possible. Try not to be too experimental or too avant-garde in such a way that your creativity will now overlap with the creativity of the architect. Okay, so try not to overlap the creative vision of the architect. As much as possible, your photograph must represent correctly and accurately the architectural work. Okay, so if it's gonna be too experimental, sometimes it will detract or distract, or it will detract to the artistic intent of the architect. Okay, so that's why, as mentioned here, always go back to the intent. Okay, your job here is to showcase the artistic intent of the architect, engineer, or creative force behind the building. So once again, this is not all about you. This is more of the creativity and the creative vision of the architect. Okay, so you have to show his work in the best light possible. Okay, so you accentuate all the details. You make sure that the person who is viewing the image or the architectural photograph is able to appreciate the building. Okay, this is not about you. Okay, this is more of the architectural work. Okay, and then the last tip is practice. Of course, you just have to keep on practicing and make mistakes. Alright, so that ends my discussion on photography.